Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Neighbor Didn't Like How I Did My Own Lawn. I moved into my house around the same time as my next door neighbor's new construction neighborhood. We both do our own lawns. They bag their cuttings, I self-mulch, leave the cuttings mulched on the lawn and don't bag. One day I mow the lawn and leave for some errands. I come home to the cuttings I had left on the lawn all raked up and thrown all over my front porch door with a threatening note telling me if this ever happened again and I didn't do my lawn properly from now on, there would be consequences and it would be worse next time. I went over to my neighbor's house, told her I would call the police for threatening me if she ever tried a stunt like this again, and that next time she had a problem, maybe try talking with me like an adult, and gave her my phone number. Her husband apologized and said his wife was batshit crazy and he was really sorry. Wife never apologized. I then promptly didn't mow the front lawn for over 6 months, no hoa. I made sure to mow the backyard and make a display of bagging those cuttings and carrying them out front for the neighbor to see, but left the front nice and overgrown. I also ended up having her car towed from in front of her own house. Coincidentally, code enforcement can't force you to mow your lawn, but if you leave a vehicle on the street for over 72 hours without moving it, they'll impound. $600 later she got her car back and I haven't heard a peep from her. The next one is titled, Case of the Missing Floor Buffer. About 20 years ago, I was enlisted in the Marines. One of the things Marines are famous for is janitorial service. We swept, we mopped, and we buffed the floor like nobody's business. It wasn't wartime, this is Garrison Marine Corps. Since the day I checked in, my platoon was assigned 2 floor buffers. My specific shop within the platoon was accountable for producing those floor buffers during inspection. Thing is, the shop had only ever had 1 floor buffer, and my shop took the hit for not being able to produce a piece of government property during an inspection. More specifically, I took the hit. A year or 2 went by, and perhaps 2 or 3 of these inspections had occurred. All resulting in our inability to produce the 2nd floor buffer, and all giving my shop a black mark on our inspection readiness record, because, if you're gonna go to war, you're gonna need 2 floor buffers. By this time, I get wise to how DRMO works, Defense Reutilization and Marketing Office. Basically, it's where units like mine can dispose of government property and get it off of our books, like broken chairs, refrigerators, or even vehicles. Where applicable, each item that was turned in had its serial number recorded, and a receipt for said item and serial number was issued in return. Units could also pick through what was turned in, however, they would be required to add these things to their books, cost-free. Civilians or individuals were allowed to buy items, but had to do so out of pocket. Another kick you in the nuts inspection was coming up, so the plan was hatched. A DRMO run was made, where a floor buffer handle was procured, as an individual. I believe $2 was handed over to pay for this item. The floor buffer handle, it should be noted, does not contain the serial number of the floor buffer, the big bottom round thing did. The handle was brought back to my shop, engraved with the missing floor buffer's serial number, and promptly returned to DRMO. A receipt containing the return of a floor buffer with a serial number that matched the missing floor buffer was issued, and that receipt was taken to our supply officer to remove the specific floor buffer from our inventory. Through malicious compliance, the case of the missing floor buffer was solved. The next one is titled, He Told Me to Just Fix It, So I Did. This might be a little tame, but even tame stories make for amusing stories at times. This happened several years ago, so I might not remember all the details, but I'm going to try to remember to the best of my ability. I work at a retail store that sells everything from groceries to home goods to clothing. No, it's not the big W word, and back before I was in my current position, I was the closing cashier in my department. Typically the manager would just let the cashier close the register and leave without doing additional work, but sometimes if you were scheduled a little later then they would have us do some closing cleanup. Putting away items from customer service, pulling stuff forward on the shelves, that sort of stuff. One night my manager came by as I was closing up the register and asked me to fix a shipper that was near the register before I left. I asked what he meant and he said, "Just fix it," and walked off. As I was walking past it to drop the money, I could see that it was a complete mess. This shipper was actually two shippers of Hot Wheels that were placed back to back with product inside the back parts as well as the front, and customers who collect Hot Wheels had pulled the two pieces apart and dug through the middle as well. I could see that I'm the middle. There were cars that had fallen down, and to push it together I'd have to pull them apart and pick all of these up. So I pulled them apart. I knew that no matter how well I cleaned it up today, I was probably going to encounter it being pulled apart again the next night by customers and have to repeat this task. The outside and inside was pretty picked over and I got an idea. I knew it wasn't what my manager had intended, but I had asked him to clarify and he had simply said, "Just fix it," so I decided to fix it. I proceeded to pull every single Hot Wheel from the inside of the shipper and put them on the floor around it. I made sure they were as close to the shipper to not create a hazard to my coworkers should they come by. Then I went to the register and I got the thick clear packing tape we kept at the register and I put the shippers together and I ran tape around the place where the two met, adding a few cross strips to secure it better. Then I proceeded to straighten up the outside portions of the shipper, adding in cars from the floor as they fit. When my manager came back by to check in, he saw me kneeling on the floor surrounded by Hot Wheels and he said, "What the hell?" I replied, "You told me to fix it, so I'm fixing it." He said, "I meant just to straighten it up." I responded, "You didn't say straighten it up. You said fix it." We still work together although he's no longer a manager, stepped down of his own accord, and we still laugh about the story from time to time. The next one is titled, "Perfect Parts, You Say?" This just happened earlier today, so I figured I'd share it with everyone. It may get a little technical, hard to understand for folks outside manufacturing, so I will clarify if anyone has questions or update the post with better wording. A bit of backstory is needed here for understanding the scenario. I work in a robotic CNC cell. I make stuff out of aluminum with robots and machines that works on a 2x10 hour per day schedule. When I come in, the robots have run, lights out, unattended for 2 hours and they do the same after I leave. Since no one is around to pass off any messages when I arrive, we leave notes for the other shift and kind of play the telephone game. My coworker, Patrick, and I run up to 7 machines at once, depending on currently running jobs and the workload. A few weeks ago, I got word that our company got some massive orders for an American firearm manufacturer, and they wanted the parts done as soon as possible, if not sooner. Classic election year. I had run these parts a couple of years ago and remembered how much of a pain in the butt they were. Now, when we started production on these R15 hand guards, we had already been running first operation parts for another company within the corporate umbrella for years. Instead of just supplying them with parts, we were making the precursor parts then finishing the machining process in-house, too. Here is where the malicious compliance comes into place. I had been cleaning up, deburring the parts in the manner of which I was accustomed, and Patrick was likewise helping after I showed him what to do. One day, the head of the project, Janice, came down to talk about the parts, with a massive revised standard to debur and review the hand guards. Our workload basically doubled. One of the changes said to keep the machine going at all times and that any parts we couldn't get to would be stacked on a pallet for someone to get to later. Another said that the surface finish needed to be perfect and defect-free. Now enter the crap show. We get slammed with all kinds of these hand guard orders, huge size orders and multiple different length parts, and it's wildly apparent we can't keep up. Parts are filling up the pallets and every day is a fustercluck. On top of that, parts were being found left and right that apparently were not up to the customer's ludicrously high standards. The situation was not good. Janice left several notes about parts being found with burrs and surface defects. At this point, I'm getting annoyed. For context, this is what all went into the process. A first operation done on one machine, a second op, much lengthier in run time, on another, then a several-minute long, very picky deburring process, tumbling parts in ceramic media for 20 minutes, then a thorough inspection before initialing the part in Sharpie, before bagging and boxing. I went over some of the day and weekend shift parts and found a super sloppy bunch of parts, and was essentially getting scolded frequently for their lazy attempts at cleaning up the parts. I decided then and there that I would, in fact, make perfect parts, the process be damned. Every day for the last 2 weeks, I pored over the part inspection with the keen eye and intensity of a bald eagle hunting for prey. Any and every bit of that part got buffed out with Scotch-Brite, filed down, brushed to absolute perfection. Defects as small and puissant as these were painstakingly blended. Naturally, this took a ton of time. Some parts took upwards of 20 minutes apiece. Parts started piling up to the point that Janice came around to figure out what was going on as well as one-on-one inspect our parts. It turns out day shift wasn't even bothering to deburr parts and just piled them up, and I was being too good at inspecting after being called a devious little idiot for my antics and drawing a laugh. Janice backed off some of the grueling inspection, so it sped us back up a bit to keeping up. The next one is titled, "Don't Drop Too Many Fries, Sure Thing." So right now I am working in fast food at a certain place with square burgers making fries and nuggets. Now at said place, it was fine. My co-workers are great, really nice people. They cover me when I clean instead of putting me at the mercy of my managers. Speaking of the managers, they are almost all nice. Notice the almost, it will be important later. Since I am still in high school and I surprisingly have a life, I'm shocked also. I can only work Saturdays and Sundays, with Saturdays being 5 to 9 and Sundays being a mix between 7 to 3:30 and 8 to 4 respectively. Now since my football season just ended, and I am called in on a Friday. This is before I fully knew the worst manager there, let's call her Vanessa, so I do what I normally do, drops the fries, pull them up after the timer goes off, drop them into the fries holder, salt them, and put them in a carton, ready to eat. You are supposed to also use the drop timers, which is supposed to keep track of how long they are sitting there, and after a certain set time, you throw them away. I see next to no one do this, so I assumed I shouldn't do it. Well, Vanessa noticed this and began to chew me out because of it, but in a way that was way extra. Think talking like you caught your son having sex when he forgot to take out the trash. This got me a bit peeved, but I had no choice but to use them. Now the reason we don't use them is because it slows things down. You're supposed to drop more fries when the timer says so, but this isn't possible during the lunch or dinner rush without causing major overflow. No MC yet, trust me, it's coming. Now Vanessa tells me to switch out trash cans, so I let the guy on grill, we'll call him Chad, know to keep an eye on it and to use the timer because Vanessa wanted me to. So I switch him out, and no later than 2 minutes after I'm done, she gets up in my face about not dropping it on the timer. I tried to explain to her why this wouldn't work, but she insisted on it. So I used the timers and slowed down production. The rush died down a bit, and I still used the timers as I didn't want my head chewed yet again for a third time. Nonetheless, Vanessa found a way to scream at me. She told me to drop less fries, idiot. Now I politely told her that she was the one that told me to drop it on said timer. Now what I said and how I said it didn't show the complete riot going in my head. I was saying to myself, which you just said to drop more. She screams at me to do it anyway. Cue the malicious compliance. So the rush picks back up, and I do not drop a single fry. I take box after box from each and every order until there was enough in there for one more large fry. That's when I dropped the amount for another large fry right then. I also followed the left and right basket rule, no basket of fries from the right to go on the left, to really stick it to her. Manager tries to chew me out once again, but I informed her that I was just following her orders. She tries to flip the script, saying she never said that and that she was going to write me up for it. Thankfully Chad overheard the previous conversations and let her know that yes, she did say that. She tries to put Chad down, telling him to mind his business and threatened him a write-up. Seems like game over for us, right? Except it isn't. Our second savior, the other manager working at that point, let's call him Aaron, also overheard the conversation and also let her know that she said that. Now she can't threaten a write-up on someone on the same level as herself, so what does she do? Excuses herself and him to the back, where a glorious shouting match had occurred. We all heard the yells and promptly pulled out our phones. We all see Vanessa storm up here, screams, "Fuck you all," and leaves out the front door in front of a crowd full of people, a 2020 crowd, as I like to call them, and put the pedal to the metal on her 2005 Honda Civic. And that was the past of Vanessa. After the fact, we got a new manager that was leagues better than Vanessa, and everything was in balance. And to add salt to her massive wound, I found her recently at another fast food chain, where I said to her, "Don't drop too many fries, lady." The next one is titled, "Round My Hours." Okay, thanks. I work at a place where many people are salary, but there are also people on a time clock. Most of the time clock employees have a factory worker kind of position, so that makes a lot of sense. Then there are mainly office workers, like me, who are on a punch clock due to our positions. Office workers on the time clock generally have their time checked by supervisors who don't really care about some overtime. Anyway, we used to have a pay service which also provided a time clock that would log the minute you used the machine. It would calculate your time based on the minute you punched in or out. I thought this was a pretty good idea, it made sense to me. Then, as the title implies, this was no longer the case. Our company switched to a different payroll service and had a different time clock. The new service began to round my time to the nearest quarter hour. It took me a couple paychecks to finally figure out what was happening. I saw that it clearly rounded to the nearest quarter hour, but I assumed, at first, that it was counting every minute and rounding. No, it was rounding up or down from the minute you used the clock. I was annoyed by this at first. I was especially annoyed that there was another rule where the clock would always round up to the next quarter hour during the first clock in of the day. I saw no reason for the clock to round, it is a computer and the math is easy. Eventually, realized that the new rules were made for the dozens of production workers. They have to begin working at, and start being paid for, a certain time, so they have to clock in a little early. They also take their lunches all around the same time. The new time clock rules make a lot of sense, for them. I work in the office, and I don't have a strict schedule. If I wanted to blow through lunch and leave early, I'm allowed. I can take lunch at 11 or 2 or whenever, nobody cares. I have work to do and I do it. I know that I'm very lucky to be in this situation, but my relationship with HR regarding this time clock started on the wrong foot. Cue malicious compliance. Knowing that it makes no difference to my pay if I clock in at 8:01 or 8:15, if I'm running a little late in the morning, I'll just calm down and take an extra minute. For lunch, I'll usually now clock out at something like 12:08 and then clock back in at like 12:51. That's 43 minutes to eat, but it only counts as 30 minutes as far as the time clock cares. Then when I leave, if I'm leaving at 5 for example, I'll clock out at like 5:08, which counts as 5:15. I gently expressed a dissatisfaction with the rounding clock when I first learned about it, so I don't really feel on the hook for this. They can come and tell me outright if they want me to change these practices. I usually squeeze some overtime out every week because of this system. The next one is titled, "Don't Beg to Ride the Unbroken Horse." I work as a horseback riding instructor and have a couple horses that I use for lessons. Each one is at a different level, one for beginners, a few for intermediate riders, my personal advanced horse that I ride, and my new Mustang. The Mustang has gone through a gentling program and currently I'm working on getting her rideable. She is a very pretty color and loves to buck whenever she runs. Her name is Dullahan. Enter good mother who I will be calling GM and her daughter entitled Brat who I will be calling EB. GM signed her daughter up for horseback riding lessons with me as her daughter really wanted to ride. We were a couple lessons in and her daughter was really improving from where she used to be. This was all before Dullahan arrived. When EB saw Dullahan, she immediately began to beg me to let her ride Dullahan. I said no and we did our lesson. The next week GM brings EB out to her lesson, and immediately EB starts to beg to ride Dullahan. GM told me to please let her daughter ride Dullahan and that she knew what the outcome would be. So I let EB catch Dullahan, and I put the bareback pad on Dullahan. I wasn't going to let this kid ride Dullahan in a saddle as I didn't want her feet to get caught in the stirrups. I led Dullahan to the arena and let EB get up on Dullahan. Dullahan immediately starts to trot off and ignores EB's attempts to stop her. Dullahan starts to get more and more excited and went faster and faster. I was honestly surprised EB managed to hold on for so long. Of course, because she was panicking and tensing up, Dullahan only went faster, almost breaking into a gallop. But before that could happen, Dullahan let out a couple small bucks and EB immediately fell to the ground. Dullahan ran up to me and I caught her before going to check on EB. She was crying on the ground and seemed pretty scared. I told her to get up and she did. She wasn't hurt and the arena sand is soft, so she probably wouldn't even bruise. She asked me between sobs, why did the stupid horse buck me off, and I told her, the horse was only doing what you were asking it to do. I told you that you weren't able to ride Dullahan, but you kept begging, so I figured I'd let you get bucked off your high horse. After that I let EB ride Sage, my beginner horse, and EB listened to everything I said. After the lesson, GM thanked me for letting her kid learn the hard way why you should listen to those who know better than you. If anyone is concerned about why I would let a kid ride an unbroken horse, I knew it would be pretty safe as we were in an arena and I knew what Dullahan would do. When I was her age I got pretty much the exact same lesson, and I think that every person who rides horses needs to learn that lesson. It makes you respect the horse better and watch what your cues are. The last one is titled, Smoked Out on 4/20. I want to preface this by saying that I like my neighbors and do not wish ill on them. Over the past few weeks, being home on quarantine, I've been doing a bit of gardening. As such, the debris pile had grown quite large. I live outside city limits, and having had a heavy rain last night, I decided today would be the day that it would all be incinerated. I began my fire just after work, about 5 p.m. Close to 7 now, and I get a knock at my door from the fire marshal and a fire truck of 4 firemen. They say I've gotten a smoke complaint and ask nicely if I could put out my fire. I'm not bothered in the least in this, because I like firemen. I casually warn them I'm not a pro like them and that I've never actually put out a fire. They help me attach 2 of my hoses together and I extinguish the dying embers to their satisfaction. Compliance? Well, the fire was almost burned out. Had I not doused it with water, it would have finished its inferno in another 20 minutes. As I write this, there is currently more smoke than ever emanating from my once proud crematory. I'd call in a smoke complaint on myself at this point. Thanks for listening.